My name is Lavinia Holmes, and the night my father mocked me, I didn't bleed. I froze. He raised his glass, looked straight at me, and said, "Discipline clearly skips a generation." The crowd laughed. The sound cut through me sharper than any blade. I smiled back, because soldiers don't flinch, especially when the enemy shares your last name. Then his heir, the son he always wanted, leaned in and whispered, "They still talk about you. Eudora, the Phantom." And just like that, every lie my father ever told about me began to collapse. Right there, under the weight of the truth he'd spent a lifetime trying to bury. The ballroom shimmered with too much brass and not enough warmth. Veterans in pressed uniforms filled the room, trading the same stories they'd told for decades. Laughter clinked against glassware, echoing off the flags that lined the walls. It was supposed to be a celebration, a tribute to 50 years of service under the name Whitfield. At the center of it all stood my father, proud and immovable, like a monument that refused to weather. The lights loved him. He spoke with that commanding tone he never turned off, raising his glass to the crowd as though every face there had served under his command. He called it a night to honor the Whitfield legacy. And when he said the word legacy, he looked straight at Landon, his chosen one, the heir who wore his flight suit like inherited armor. Applause followed, steady and approving. Then my father turned toward me. The smile on his face softened, just enough to sting. He said something about me being brilliant behind a desk, then joked that not everyone was meant to fly. The crowd chuckled. Good, obedient laughter. I didn't move. I just held his gaze and let the noise wash over me like engine roar in a storm. Somewhere behind me, a chair scraped. A voice, older and careful, broke the rhythm of laughter. "Wait, are you that phantom?" It wasn't loud, but it carried. The sound of that name cut through the room like a wing slicing air. Heads turned, conversations stalled. For a second, even my father's voice went silent. And in that quiet, the whole room began to shift, just slightly, like an aircraft changing course without warning. Hill Air Base, Utah, was a place where silence had ranks. Even the wind seemed to march in formation. Inside our small officers' quarters, discipline wasn't a habit. It was scripture. My father measured love in straight lines and sharp corners, shoes aligned at 45 degrees, beds flat enough to bounce a coin, meals served at 1800, not 6 o'clock. When my mother died, the house lost warmth but gained more rules. My father filled the absence with drills. Then came Evelyn, polished and smiling, smelling of perfume instead of jet fuel. She fit perfectly into his world, smooth, unwrinkled, strategic. She once looked at me and said, "Smart girls rarely make good company." By 13, I had learned that error was weakness. After a knee injury kept me from running track, weight crept on. My father saw it as defiance, not recovery. Each morning, he made me run laps around the base while he timed me with his old flight stopwatch. Each meal, he logged the numbers on a chart. "Discipline isn't what you want," he'd say. "It's what you carry." So I carried it. The humiliation, the breath, the ache in my lungs, somewhere between his orders. I found rhythm. Breath became armor. The sting of shame turned into a pulse I could control. He thought he was breaking me into shape. He was training me for gravity. Boston was louder, freer, but I still woke before dawn out of reflex. MIT was supposed to be a new life, yet I treated it like another base. That's where I met Marvin Grayson, a retired Air Force officer teaching advanced aerodynamics. He watched how I handled pressure in the simulator, how my hands stayed steady while others overcorrected. After class one day, he said quietly, "Discipline isn't control, it's clarity." I wrote it down like a secret order, under his guidance. I joined the student flight program. The first time I took the aircraft up alone, a crosswind hit hard. The plane trembled, gauges flickered, but my breathing stayed even. I adjusted pitch, eased throttle, rode the turbulence until it gave way. When the wheels kissed the ground, Marvin met me on the runway, a rare grin breaking through. "You've got phantom hands," he said. "Soft, precise, invisible until they save you." Weeks later, he discovered who I was, the daughter of Charles Whitfield, the man who had once buried his research under military politics. Marvin never mentioned it directly. He just told me, "You'll have to prove your name isn't your cage." I didn't answer. I simply kept flying. For the first time, I understood that discipline could be freedom, not punishment. My father controlled to maintain order. I learned control to stay in the air. And that difference, quiet but absolute, was the first lift I ever earned on my own. Nellis Air Force Base looked endless under the desert sun, a grid of silver and heat. I was 25, one of the youngest pilots in the F-22 test program. The day started like every other. Checklist, pre-flight, calm voice in my headset. Then 6 minutes vanished. The control tower lost me. No radar, no radio, nothing but empty sky. I followed instinct and training, leveling through static until the desert appeared again. When I landed, the air around the hangar felt heavier than the jet. I filed the report, pages of data and equations showing what had happened. The radar had folded around the aircraft. True stealth, accidental perfection. 2 days later, my father called me into the briefing room. The report he slid across the table wasn't mine anymore. The section marked Pilot E. Whitfield was gone, replaced with simulated test. He said the system wasn't stable, that I'd lost focus, that the incident would stay classified. Then he dismissed me. I found the original radar file before he deleted it. 6 minutes of silence labeled Pilot E. Whitfield. I encrypted it under a name only I would know. Echo Protocol. Word spread on base about a jet that disappeared mid-flight. Someone called the pilot Phantom, though no one could prove who it was. Weeks later, my father accepted a commendation on behalf of his technical team. My name wasn't mentioned. I joined the radar division, smiling for the cameras, invisible by design. In the group photo, he stood in the center, grinning. I looked at the lens, expressionless. He thought he'd erased me, but even ghosts leave a signal. 3 years later, the war stories had turned into contracts. Phantom X was no longer a military secret. It was a brand, polished for investors. I worked quietly at Lockridge Aerospace, under another name, the consultant no one questioned. One morning, an internal memo listed the new military liaisons. At the top, Captain Landon Whitfield, my father's protege, the heir who would carry the family name into the next era. He was stepping into the cockpit of my design. At the first project briefing, my father stood before a room of executives explaining adaptive radar nulling, the same algorithm I had written years ago. "Developed by my son's team," he said. Applause filled the room. I sat in the back, unseen, tracing the line of code in the presentation. My line. Afterward, Landon approached me, friendly, unknowing. "You're the math brain behind our design, right?" He smiled like he was paying me a compliment. He had no idea I was the architecture itself. Later, inside the code archive, I found it, EW02, embedded deep inside the software, a signature that couldn't be removed without breaking the system. Proof. Rumor said a high-ranking officer, General Abbott, was reviewing the program's authorship before the final government contract. The clock had started. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned away, leaving focus. I wasn't fighting for my name. I was rewriting what legacy meant. Through the glass of the hangar, Landon posed in a new flight suit while cameras flashed. I opened my laptop, entered the passkey to Echo Protocol. The screen blinked once, then printed the words, "Ready for reappearance." The ballroom glittered like a shrine to ego, crystal chandeliers, brass plaques, and a sea of metals catching the light. The banners read Whitfield Legacy Gala, and at the podium stood my father, basking in the reflection of his own name. He opened with his favorite sermon. The Whitfield name has always stood for precision, courage, and control. His voice carried through the room like an anthem. He announced that Landon would become the face of the Phantom X program, the new generation of pilots who would carry the legacy forward. The applause thundered. When it finally died, he gestured toward my table at the back. And my daughter, Eudora. She keeps the numbers running behind the scenes. The crowd laughed, assuming it was meant as humor. I didn't. Then the first crack appeared. The video cued for Landon's tribute began rolling. Footage of a test flight, identical to one I had flown years ago, same angle, same data stream. Only the pilot's name was different. My flight, renamed, my ghost resurrected under another face. From across the aisle, I caught General Abbott exchanging a quiet word with one of the Lockridge engineers. Those numbers in the HUD, they matched the original Phantom file. His brows drew together. He requested to see the source data after the ceremony. Meanwhile, a young reporter, someone who had once interviewed me at Lockridge, was streaming the event live to a veterans network. Within minutes, the hashtag #TalkYourWhitfieldLegacy flooded with comments. Who's the real Phantom? When Landon took the stage, nervous and sincere, he said the one thing that split the air in half. I wouldn't be here without the anonymous engineer who wrote the flight code we all rely on. She's in this room. A silence fell heavy enough to ground a jet. My father froze, suspicion clouding his face. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The truth was already climbing altitude on its own. As the lights dimmed for the final video, I looked at the microphone trembling in my father's hand and smiled to myself. He built his legacy on control. Tonight, he'll learn what happens when control loses signal. The room darkened to a hush as the screen filled with the Phantom X footage. Applause broke like thunder when the jet lifted into the clouds. The data feed flickered across the giant LED wall. Altitude, wind speed, coordinates. And then, without warning, the numbers began to change. The algorithm I'd buried years ago inside Echo Protocol awakened. The system synced automatically with the Lockridge cloud, restoring the original metadata. In the bottom corner of the screen, a new line appeared in bold white text. Pilot, Phantom, authorized, E. Whitfield. The applause stopped mid-clap. 1,000 eyes shifted toward my father. General Abbott rose from his seat. Colonel Whitfield, care to explain this? The old man stiffened, beads of sweat rising along his collar. Evelyn stared into her glass. Landon blinked at the screen, whispering, E. Whitfield? Then, from the side aisle, a woman's voice rang clear, a former communications officer from my old unit. She flew it. I was on comms that day. We lost her signal for 6 minutes. She's the reason Phantom even exists. My father snatched the microphone, voice breaking. She's exaggerating. It was a simulation. No, sir. Abbott cut in sharply. The flight path matches the real Phantom log. The pilot of record is E. Whitfield. The crowd rippled with realization, one by one. The veterans began to rise. A few nodded toward me, others saluted quietly. The word Phantom passed through the room like a current. My father's hand slipped. The microphone hit the floor with a metallic click. I stood, not triumphant, only steady. No one needs to be humiliated to learn the truth. My voice was calm, level, the opposite of his. Abbott crossed the stage, came to attention, and saluted me. Others followed, engineers, officers, even Landon, his jaw tight with something that looked like awe. For the first time, my father wasn't the one being saluted. He simply watched as every person he'd taught to obey turned their respect elsewhere. Recognition is louder than applause. The room filled with the quiet sound of honor restored, and in that silence, the light caught the edge of my face, calm, resolute, untouchable. The ballroom had turned into static, clinking glasses, half-whispered disbelief, the echo of a microphone rolling across the floor. My father reached for it, his hand trembling as he tried to pull the night back under his command. "It's a misunderstanding," he shouted. "The data's from a simulator. She's not a combat pilot." General Abbott stepped forward, his voice calm but sharp. Colonel, with respect, that's enough. The flight path is real. The pilot's record was removed manually. Then he turned to me. Miss Whitfield, you don't have to speak. The room already knows. Every eye found me. Landon's head bowed slightly. Evelyn's hand trembled around her wine glass. I stood still, steady in the noise that wasn't noise anymore. No one needs to be humiliated to learn the truth, I said, my voice low but clear. Abbott straightened, heels clicking together, and saluted me. One officer followed, then another. Soon the room rose in unison. Engineers, veterans, even Landon himself. He placed his glass down, spine straight, and saluted me for the first time in his life. My father stayed frozen. The man who'd been saluted his whole career now stood invisible in a room full of respect. The only sounds were the shuffle of boots, the soft chime of metals, and my own steady breath. I lifted my hand and returned Abbott's salute. Recognition is louder than applause. The lights dimmed. My father's head lowered, not in defeat, but in the quiet surrender of a man finally seeing the truth he had buried. Morning settled over the Nevada desert like a held breath. Inside the hangar, light filtered through the steel beams, slicing across the quiet. The only sound was the steady hum of the fans and the soft scrape of cloth against metal as I wiped down the cockpit. Landon appeared at the doorway, still wearing yesterday's flight suit, the patch slightly crooked from the night before. His voice cracked, rough from sleeplessness. You stole my night. I didn't look up. I didn't steal it. Landon, I built the light you're standing in. He said nothing, just stood there with tears hanging in the corners of his eyes, unsure if they came from anger or relief. I spoke again, quietly, the way our father used to instruct us. Control is not courage. Discipline is. I showed him how to breathe through resistance, anti-G breathing, the rhythm that keeps a pilot conscious when gravity tries to crush them. In for 4, I said. Out for 6. He lasted 3 rounds before collapsing, gasping. I caught him by the shoulder. Again! When he steadied, a shadow moved at the door. My father stood there, holding a silver coin, the one General Abbott had given him. His voice carried the weight of years. I deleted your file. I told myself I was protecting you. I was protecting my pride. For a long moment, the air was thick with what had never been said. Then he met my eyes and spoke the words he'd withheld all my life. Captain Eudora. No one moved, no embraces, no speeches, just breathing. In for 4, out for 6. Father, son, daughter. 3 lives finding the same rhythm for the first time. As he turned to leave, sunlight flared behind him. He paused, looked back once. Legacy isn't what you hand down, he said softly. It's what you let go. I watched him disappear into the morning, the desert air still humming, my chest finally light enough to breathe. A year later, the Utah sky stretched wide and clear, the kind of blue that belonged only to pilots. Hill Air Base had changed. The old hangars had been repainted. New flags hung in straight lines, and on the largest banner, gold letters spelled out, Whitfield Air Discipline Center. The auditorium buzzed with uniformed bodies, medals, and murmurs. General Abbott sat near the front, stoic but proud. Landon, now an instructor, wore his training suit, posture calm and centered. My father sat beside him, hands folded, a man no longer armored by rank, but by humility. When they called my name, I walked to the podium without the weight that used to follow me. The microphone hummed softly, steady and clean. For the first time, the sound didn't scare me. Discipline isn't about perfection, I said, voice even, unhurried. It's about honesty under pressure. The room quieted. Faces turned toward me, but this time, no one was measuring, judging, or waiting for me to falter. I told the story, not in names, not in blame, but in lessons. Sometimes, I said, to be seen, you first have to disappear. The applause came like wind against wings. gentle, lifting, real. Then General Abbott rose from his seat, walked forward, and handed me a medal encased in glass. The Phantom Service Medal, a new honor, created to recognize those who advanced flight innovation beyond visibility. My name was engraved beneath the insignia, E. Whitfield. The room stood and clapped again, but the sound blurred when I saw my father slowly rising from his seat. He faced me with deliberate grace, straightened his spine, and lifted his hand to his forehead. The gesture was crisp, precise, a formal salute. "For the daughter who taught me how to breathe," he said quietly, almost to himself. Landon followed, his salute sharp. Then the others, Abbott, the engineers, the young cadets, until the entire hall stood in silence, saluting together. The moment felt lighter than pride and heavier than forgiveness. When it was over, I stepped down from the stage. The air outside smelled like jet fuel and sunlight. Through the hangar window, an F-22 Phantom X rolled down the runway and lifted gracefully into the morning sky. Its metallic surface caught the sun, glinting like a pulse of memory. I stood there a long moment, watching it climb, the hum of the engines fading into the wind. My father's voice echoed in my mind, softer now, almost tender. "Legacy isn't what you hand down, it's what you let go." And as the jet disappeared into the light, I finally understood. Some legacies don't stay on the ground. Some take flight, only when you stop trying to control their wings. Some legacies fly higher when they finally let go.